So let's understand modules. Let's imagine we have multiple files and we want to organize our code. So maybe we want to create a math.js file and we want to create some math functions in there. So we want, for example, say function sum, we are accepting parameter a and b, and we just want to essentially create the sum. So let's just console.log, maybe the sum of a and b. So this is like a really simple function. So how can I export this function and use this function inside of another file? So for example, inside of our index.js file. And this is really simple. You're just going to say export function sum, and by doing so, you basically exported the function. So now we can also go ahead and say that we want to call our function. So we are going to import our sum function, as you can see, and here you already have a hint that you have to import it from ./math. So we're going to say ./math.js. Now we've imported our sum function, and now we can use the sum function as if we've declared it inside of this file. So we can, for example, say we want to add 10 to 10. We're going to run this code. We again have to take a look inside of our browser. We're going to reload this. And right here you see we're getting an uncaught syntax error, cannot use import statement outside a module. So in order to use an import statement, so essentially importing things from another module, you have to declare a file inside of our index.html as a module. And right now it's not defined as a module. So what we can do in order to do so, we can say type is equal to a module. So we are defining this as a module. And right now we are getting 20 inside of the console, and as you can see, this works. So in order to use one file inside of another file, or at least the functions of this file, you have to declare it as a module, because if you think in terms of modules, every single file in JavaScript can be seen as a module once defined as a module, and modules obviously have the possibility or the option to interact with each other. So probably you have one module for math functions, another module for logic, another module for displaying stuff, and so on. And maybe one module wants some functionality from another module. So one module is able to import the functionality of another module and then use this functionality inside of its own module essentially. So I really want you to understand the concept of modules basically. And basically a module is just a file, and every file probably has its own purpose. And when you work on a big project, it might be like really important to organize your code and probably separate the logic from displaying stuff, from the logic that you're using to maybe create math operations and so on. So I hope you get the idea. There's also a second way to export stuff that I'm not really using that often, but you can also create a default export. So you could, for example, say, let's just get rid of this export, and we can just say export default. And now as a default export of our package, we can create the sums. And the main difference essentially is that the import works a little bit different when you use a default export. So you can, for example, go in here and say, we're going to import sum, for example, from ./math.js right here. So like so, and now we're again getting 20. So this works exactly the same. The only difference is if you have a named import, you can like define all of the names right here. So you can, for example, say sum, multiply, and so on. So if you would have a function of multiply, for example, you could say export function multiply. And you could, for example, again, define two values and say we are just going to return a times b, for example. And now you would have a named export, and you could use another named export right here, but you could also use a default export, wouldn't really matter too much. And now you could essentially, by using those brackets, import two named exports if you wanted to. So if you just have like one single big function inside of a file, you can easily just say this is the default export for this file. But if you have multiple small functions, it might make more sense to use the named export. And I think you get the hang of it once you're just working a little bit with it.